A woman who was declared dead was pregnant, but she moved her mouth during the wake. The family was shocked by what they discovered and called the police. The Santa U chapel was on top of a small hill surrounded by short trees and the silence of a hot, quiet afternoon. Inside, the air was heavy and thick, as if time had stopped. The lit candles fluttered slightly, and the smell of white flowers mixed with incense filled every corner. There was no music or prayers, only the muffled sound of grief trying to remain silent. In the center of the room, a light cold coffin stood open. Inside, lying with her hands on her chest, was Lucy Ramirez. She was only 28 years old and between 7 and 8 months pregnant. Her face was peaceful, but very pale, her lips already a little purple, her eyes closed as if she were asleep, but from a dream from which there is no return. The family was around her, but no one knew what to do. Most were standing, pressed against the walls, trying to respect the moment, but unable to hide the impact. Lucy was very young. She was expecting a girl. She was full of life. It all happened so fast. She fainted. The rush to the hospital, the monitor turned off. The doctors shaking their heads. They confirmed it. No heartbeat, no reaction. Sudden cardiac arrest, a belly with no movement and no heartbeat. Teresa, Lucy's grandmother, was trembling silently, sitting in the front row. The rosary slipped through her thin fingers, her eyes swollen from crying so much. She had raised Lucy alone since she was a little girl. She was more than a granddaughter. She was a daughter, a friend, a companion. Now it seemed like a dream. It seemed like she was going to open her eyes at any moment and say, "Oh, let's go home. This is scary." But she didn't say anything. On the other side of the coffin stood Matthew, her fiancé. His hands tucked into his pants pockets, his gaze fixed on her. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stared as if waiting for an answer, a sign, anything. Sometimes he shook his head slowly, as if saying to himself, "No, it can't be." Time passed slowly, very slowly. The evening light streamed through the chapel window and gently touched Lucy's face, illuminating her round belly. It was impossible not to look at that belly. The baby was still there, but the silence said too much. A distant cousin whispered behind her, "So beautiful. It looks like she's going to be a mother tomorrow." Another replied, "Life doesn't ask questions, it just takes." Matthew knelt down. Slowly he placed his hand on Lucy's belly, arranging his fingers carefully, as if afraid of hurting her. And then, in a hoarse whisper, he said, "Pertisam, I should have come back sooner. I should have stayed with you." He swallowed his tears. He tried, but he couldn't. His shoulders shook. Tears fell directly onto the light blue dress Lucy was wearing. It was the dress she had chosen to leave the hospital with her daughter in her arms. Now it was the dress of farewell. The few friends who had come from the village remained silent. A priest standing near the altar prepared his final words, but he took his time, perhaps out of respect, perhaps because he didn't know what to say. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken. A cold wind blew in through the open door of the chapel, causing the candles to flicker more. Some even went out. The darkness grew, but no one moved. At that moment, it was as if the whole world had stopped to mourn with that family. As if life itself, in silence, was asking for forgiveness for taking someone away so soon who still had so much to live for. Matthew could not move from where he stood. He seemed glued to the cold floor of the chapel right in front of the coffin. The world around him became blurry, the soft voices of the family, the sound of the chairs creaking, the wind hitting the wooden door. Everything disappeared. Only she existed. Lucy and that silent body that looked like a wax statue, barely blinking. He stared at her face as if trying to engrave every line, every detail, afraid of forgetting, but also angry, in pain, with something that cannot be explained. "How could you leave me like this?" he whispered so softly that no one heard him. His fingers trembled. The hand gently caressed her face, then slowly moved down to her belly. The belly still seemed alive, so round, so warm. Maybe it was just her imagination, but she didn't want to let go. She didn't want to move from there. He moved closer, knelt down again, put his face close to her belly, his mouth trembling, his eyes filling with tears, and then he spoke in a broken voice. "I'm sorry, Lucy. I'm sorry for not being home when it all happened. I got caught up with work. I thought I'd have time, that I could work everything out." Then he swallowed, but his throat wouldn't let him. The lump wouldn't go down. "I should have listened to you when you said you felt dizzy, that you were scared. I should have cancelled everything and rushed home." The palm of his hand remained firmly on her belly, as if he wanted to protect it or bring it back. "I love you so much, so much. And now I don't know where to put all this love." Matthew's whole body was shaking, but he wasn't crying loudly. It was a hidden cry, the cry of a man trying to hold it in. But it came out silently down the sides of his face, down his chin, down his clothes. He turned his face away and rested his forehead on Lucy's belly, and he stayed like that, as if time had stopped, as if he were waiting for a miracle. Or maybe he just wanted to pretend for a moment longer that none of it was true. He closed his eyes and remained silent, a silence that hurt more than any scream. The clock in the chapel read almost 6 p.m. Sunlight filtered weakly through the stained glass windows, painting the floor in shades of yellow. The atmosphere was heavy. Near the coffin, a woman with her hair pulled back in a messy bun approached slowly. It was Carmen, Lucy's aunt on her father's side. She was dressed in black from head to toe and clutched a white handkerchief between her fingers. She had always been quiet, one of those people who observes everything before speaking. She approached, took a deep breath, and looked closely at Lucy. Her gaze slowly moved down from her closed eyes to her hands. She frowned, pressed her lips together, and with the tip of the handkerchief gently touched Lucy's left hand, then her right, and then her left again. She did this about 3 times. She stopped and looked around. "People," she said quietly, but loud enough for 3 or 4 to hear her. "Did anyone else notice this?" No one answered. She seemed to hesitate. "It seems that one of her hands is warmer than the other." One of the cousins sitting right behind her looked up and replied without thinking much. "It's your imagination, Auntie. At times like this, your mind sees what it wants to see." Carmen didn't insist, but she didn't leave either. She looked again, touched the inside of her wrist as if she were taking a child's temperature. She looked at Matthew, who was still on his knees, his eyes closed, his forehead resting on his wife's belly. She thought about calling him, but she didn't dare. "I swear it feels different," she murmured to herself. "This hand feels warm, or it shouldn't, right, Teresa?" Teresa, sitting just behind her, raised her head with effort. "Carmen," she said with a trembling voice, "don't start, daughter. We can't take any more. It's the pain. It confuses everything. We see miracles where there is only sadness." Carmen shook her head slowly, clenched the handkerchief between her fingers, took 2 steps back, kept looking for a few more minutes, and then kept it all to herself. Yes, that must be it. The priest returned to the altar, adjusted his stole, and prepared to begin the final prayer. The family rose with difficulty, their eyes red, their hands shaking, their feet heavy. It was time to say goodbye. No one spoke about the hands again. No one wanted to question the painful reality, because sometimes believing that it's over hurts less than having hope. The chapel fell even more silent when the priest said in a tired voice that it was time to end. The family approached slowly, one by one. Each family member said goodbye with a gentle touch on the wood, a kiss in the air, a whispered prayer. The candles were half burned. The smell of flowers was becoming strong. Night was falling outside, and the wind brought a strange cold that entered through the cracks in the windows. Matthew didn't want to move. He remained on his knees, his hands clasped to Lucy's, his face pressed against her belly. But when 2 funeral home workers approached with black gloves and a white cloth in their hands, he stood up slowly, his eyes red, his breathing short, and ran his hand over his face, trying to calm down. He stood next to the coffin, unable to say anything. He just stared. He looked as if he were begging desperately for it not to be true. One of the workers signaled they were going to close the coffin. "Teresa," Teresa murmured with her eyes closed. "Go with God, my daughter." The first creak of the lid as it moved sounded loud in the chapel, and that was when a low, faint sound was heard. But it wasn't wood. It wasn't wind. It wasn't a chair. It was a human sound. A small moan, like a sigh stuck in the throat. "What was that?" asked someone, their voice already trembling. A cousin covered her mouth with her hand. An uncle stumbled backward. The worker stopped closing the lid. He looked around in fear. Another moan, a little louder. "My God!" cried Carmen. She got out of the coffin. A scream rang through the chapel. Another one. Someone fell hard to the floor. It was a young niece who fainted immediately. Matthew took a step forward, his heart pounding in his neck, his breathing uncontrolled. He looked at the coffin without understanding, but the moan returned. This time, of course, it came from inside. Lucy screamed and ran. "Open up! Open up now!" She pushed the workers aside. She pulled the white cloth from the lid in one swift motion. Her hands were shaking, but she pulled with all her strength. The lid hit the wall, and then her eyes moved. They didn't open completely, but they trembled. Her eyelids moved, the tips of her eyelashes quivered, her chest rose almost imperceptibly, but it rose. A trickle of air escaped from her half-open mouth. "She's alive," Matthew whispered, as if he couldn't believe it. And then he shouted, "She's alive! Lucy's alive!" The chapel was in chaos. People were screaming and running. Some were crying. Others were praying. The priest dropped the book on the floor. Carmen knelt down, trembling. Teresa. Teresa put her hand to her chest, her eyes wide open. Matthew leaned over Lucy's body. He touched her face with both hands. The warmth had returned. The color, though faint, was there. "Stay with me, please, my love. Stay with me," he said through his tears. She didn't respond, just breathed with difficulty very slowly. If you paid attention, her chest rose slowly as if each breath took a lot of effort. Her eyes moved but remained closed, her fingers motionless. "Someone call an ambulance," someone shouted outside. The dirt road was soon filled with people. A neighbor ran to notify the pharmacy. Another ran down the hill, shouting to warn the others. Within minutes, it seemed as if the whole town knew. The pregnant girl woke up at the wake. No one could believe it. It was a miracle, a mistake, a punishment, or a blessing. The funeral home made room right away. They removed the benches from the center and moved the chairs. An old mattress was placed on the floor of the chapel to lay Lucy down while they waited for the ambulance. Matthew held her hand the whole time. "Hang in there just a little longer, my love. You're going to be fine. You and our baby girl." His eyes were red, swollen, but steady, a mixture of despair and faith. He didn't let go of her hand for a moment. "She's breathing," he repeated. "She's breathing." A retired nurse who lived nearby came running, still wearing her kitchen apron. She bent down and felt Lucy's pulse. "She has a pulse. It's weak, but it's there," she said, trying to stay calm. "And the baby?" asked Matthew, his voice breaking. "Could she still be alive too?" The woman looked at the large belly, placed her hand on it, closed her eyes, and tried to feel something. "I don't know, son. If it was a miracle with her, the baby might also react. As long as your wife has strength, the baby has a chance. Let's put it in God's hands and wait for the doctors at the hospital to say something." Outside, the sound of the siren began to get closer. Little by little, first far away, then closer, and finally the sound of the ambulance reached the chapel door. 2 paramedics ran out. One of them didn't even have time to ask what was going on. The scene spoke for itself. A woman, presumed dead, lying on a mattress on the floor of the chapel with people crying around her, and a husband holding her hand, as if it were the only thing keeping him in this world. Matthew stood up suddenly. "She's alive. Please help her. She's pregnant, 8 months." The paramedics acted quickly. Monitor, oxygen, stretcher. They spoke to each other in low voices as they prepared Lucy to be taken away. Her breathing was weak. Blood pressure almost zero, but she's alive, said one of them as he put the neck brace on her. What about the baby? Insisted Matthew. We have to get her to the hospital now. We'll see there. People moved aside. The stretcher was wheeled quickly out of the chapel, pushed by hands with urgency. Matthew followed behind, never letting go of her hand. The ambulance arrived at the municipal hospital in California with its lights flashing, cutting through the darkness of the night. The emergency room door was already open. Nurses waited with a stretcher and equipment at the ready. The ambulance radio had already notified them. A woman 8 months pregnant, presumed dead, had awakened at her own wake. Lucy arrived with pale skin, breathing shallowly, her eyes half open but unresponsive. Matthew got out with her desperate, carrying a bag and his faith hanging from his shoulders. Please save her. Save them both. Inside the emergency room, the doctors moved quickly. Monitors were turned on, gloves were hurriedly put on, and technical words sounded like secret codes. And it was there, in the midst of the chaos, that Dr. Salazar entered wearing a white coat, her hair pulled back in a hurry, and the face of someone who has seen many things, but is still surprised by what really matters. She didn't ask any questions at first. She went straight to Lucy, checked her signs, looked at the initial tests, and asked for silence. Matthew approached with his face swollen from crying, his shirt all sweaty. Is the baby going to be okay? Tell me, doctor. She looked him in the eyes. She didn't lie to him. If what happened was a miracle, now it will be up to science to keep that miracle here inside. She ordered Lucy to be taken straight to the emergency intensive care unit. She requested imaging tests, fetal monitoring, and preparations for any emergency all at the same time. Meanwhile, in the hospital reception area, the commotion grew. Lucy's name was already being heard among nurses, guards, and onlookers. But what no one understood, what made everyone speak in hushed tones, was a question that hung in the air like a ghost. How? How can someone be declared dead and then wake up? The death certificate had already been issued. Her name was already registered as deceased in the municipal system. The hospital where she was first treated had already handed over the body without performing an autopsy. Everything was done quickly, too quickly. Matthew sat in the hallway, his head down, his elbows on his knees. A young doctor approached him, looking a little nervous. Would you like a glass of water? I just want to understand what's going on. The doctor didn't answer. On the other side of town, reporters were already starting to call asking for information. The previous hospital where Lucy was treated after fainting at home was not issuing any statements. No doctor there was answering the phone. No names were mentioned. It was as if the mistake or the miracle was something no one wanted to touch. But Matthew wasn't thinking about justice, not yet. Only one thing was going through his head. She breathed. She came back. Now she can't leave again. Dr. Salazar didn't leave any loose ends. After stabilizing Lucy in intensive care with the machines running and the team monitoring every second, she went to the medical room, grabbed a borrowed wheelchair, and wheeled it to the hospital kitchen where no one would bother her. With a folder full of papers on her lap and her laptop open, she began to cross-reference the information in Lucy's file. She typed slowly, her eyes narrowed, like someone looking for a needle in the dark. There was the full name, Lucy Ramirez, 28 years old, 34 weeks pregnant. The last 3 doctor's visits in the last 4 months. 3 visits to different units, all for the same reason, fainting. The first time they noted mild depression due to stress. The second time, possible hypoglycemia. The third time they suggested rest. No neurological examination, no CT scan, no request for an MRI, not even an electrophilog, nothing. The doctor ran her hands over her face, leaned back in her chair and whispered to herself, how could no one see this? She opened the records from the previous hospital. the same one that had delivered the body as dead without investigating. There was Lucy's last entry, already marked as confirmed death due to cardiorespiratory arrest. She read line by line, 26 minutes without response. No reflexes, blood pressure at 0. She read in a low voice, but no additional tests, no attempt to stabilize her. They didn't even wait for her to wake up. How crazy. She went back to the beginning and looked at the previous signs. In one of the consultations, a doctor had noted in the corner of the file that the patient reported frequent fainting spells, tingling in her left arm, brief memory loss, and yet no further investigation had been conducted. Dr. Salazar took out her cell phone and opened the internal group chat for hospital doctors. Lucy Ramirez has a history of neurological collapses that have been ignored. There are signs of catalepsy or neurological disconnection syndrome. She may have been mistaken for clinically dead. Urgent review of previous diagnosis, possible serious error. She sent the message and stared into space. She knew what that meant. Someone in the past had ignored a cry for help that came disguised as mild symptoms. And now a woman had almost died and could still die because no one wanted to listen properly. She closed the folder, stood up slowly, and with a broken but firm voice, she spoke quietly. This girl was buried alive due to negligence. Now she will live because of care and justice. The phone at the hospital reception desk rang in the middle of the afternoon. The receptionist, accustomed to insurance calls, requests for information, or messages from relatives, answered without haste. California Municipal Hospital. Good afternoon. On the other end of the line, a female voice, firm but trembling. She didn't seem to be crying, but something was stuck in her throat. It's about the patient, Lucy Ramirez. She's admitted there, right? Yes, ma'am. She's in intensive care. There was a silence. The receptionist was about to continue when she heard the words that made her hand freeze on the phone. I'm her mother. I want to see her. The young woman did not respond immediately. She stood there silently staring at the phone as if she had said something wrong. Excuse me? You said you were her mother. Lucy's mother. My name is Clara. Clara Ramirez. More silence. The receptionist looked at her colleague next to her, who also stopped what she was doing. Everyone in the hospital already knew. Lucy had been raised by her grandmother. Her mother had never shown up. Not for appointments, not at the hospital, not at the wake. Mrs. Clara, one moment, please. I'll transfer you to the appropriate department. Clara took a deep breath on the other end. I don't want any problems. I just need to see her, that's all. Upstairs, news of the call reached the doctors in minutes. When Matthew found out, he froze. He was sitting in the hallway of the ICU with a cup of cold coffee in his hands, trying to understand what was happening to his life. Lucy's mum asked incredulously, "Your mum called?" Dr. Salazar nodded slowly. She said, "It's your mum. She wants to see you." Matthew ran his hand over his face, tired, and stared into space. The words didn't come easily. Lucy never spoke of her fondly, always changing the subject. It was a silence that hurt more than any story. We don't know if it's true, if she's really her mom. I know she disappeared when Lucy was about 4 years old and never came back. Teresa raised her alone. They never received a letter, a phone call, nothing. The weight of the memory fell on his shoulders, as if each memory now brought new pain, and now she just shows up like this. After all, the doctor wasn't judging, just observing. What would Lucy think of this? Matthew lowered his head, swallowed hard, and remained silent for a long time until he replied in a low voice, I don't know, but she has a right to know. Even if it hurts, even if it's too late. At the reception desk, Clara was still on the line, her hands sweaty on the phone, her heart racing. She didn't know if they would let her in. She didn't know if they would listen to her, but inside she knew they would. This wasn't just a visit, it was a long overdue apology, and maybe the last. The light in the intensive care room was cold, almost blue. The monitors flickered slowly, and the sound of the constant VIP mixed with the silence of the hallways. Inside the room, Lucy didn't move. She was connected to machines, probes, tubes. A thin pillow supported her head, her eyes closed, her skin still pale but with a little color, something she didn't have on the day of the wake. Matthew was there, sitting next to her. He hadn't left the house in days. He slept in a chair with a hospital blanket over his legs. He didn't eat well. He hardly spoke to anyone. He just sat there watching time pass, waiting for a sign. His hand rested on Lucy's, and from time to time he touched her belly carefully, as if each movement were a request. A prayer without words. "Hey, little one," he whispered softly. "I'm here. Yes, Daddy's here, and Mommy's here too. She's just resting a little longer." His voice came out softly, almost breaking. He put his face on her belly like he used to when everything was a dream, when they were planning the little room, the name, the clothes. "We were going to paint the crib white. Remember? You kicked every time we played music. Your mum said you were a handful, that you were never going to stay still. And it was at that moment that it happened." A simple, small, but clear kick. Matthew stepped back in disbelief, staring at her belly, and then another little kick, a gentle push, but strong enough to be felt. Lucy's belly moved as if someone inside had knocked on the door of life. She put her hand there, pressed gently, waited, and felt it. "Are you there?" she whispered, and the voice spoke again, her eyes filled with tears. But it wasn't just sadness, it was something bigger, a mixture of relief, of miracle, of long-held love. She rested her forehead on her belly, crying softly as if she didn't want to wake anyone. "Thank you, God. Thank you. She's there." Lucy, still in a coma, did not respond, but a tear rolled slowly down one of her closed eyes, alone, silent, as if even in her sleep she too had felt the kick and was trying in her own way to say, "I'm still here." As night fell and the hospital routine began to calm down, and the sky darkened behind the fogged-up windows, a woman entered through the main door with firm but unsteady steps. She was about 50 years old, her hair tied back haphazardly, wearing simple clothes and with an expression marked by many years of absence. It was Clara Ramirez, the mother Lucy never saw grow up. She arrived with a small bag in her hand and a crumpled letter in her pocket. She went straight to the reception desk with red eyes, but her head held high. "I'm here to see my daughter, Lucy Ramirez. She's in intensive care. I'm her mother." The receptionist looked at her carefully. They had heard about this woman. It existed, but it disappeared from the map, and now it was there asking to be let in. "1 minute, please." Security was called routine call. In sensitive cases, the hospital had to consult with the medical team and the family before letting anyone who wasn't on the list in. Matthew was notified upstairs, sitting next to Lucy's bed with the dim lights on. "What?" He got up immediately. "She's here." The nurse just nodded. "She's saying she's Lucy's mother." Matthew clenched his fist tightly. He paced back and forth. His heart was pounding. His head was spinning. "She doesn't have that right. Not now." Not without Lucy's permission, he descended the stairs with heavy steps. Each step felt like a blow to his chest. When he reached the reception desk and saw Clara standing with her back to him, waiting, he stopped for a moment. It was like seeing a ghost that no one wanted to see again. She turned slowly, feeling his gaze. Time was evident in her eyes and guilt on her shoulders. "Indomitable, are you Matthew?" she said softly. He stood about 2 inches away from her. He didn't approach her. He didn't shout, but he spoke firmly. "You left. You abandoned her. And now what do you want?" She took a deep breath. Her voice trembled. "I just want to see my daughter now after more than 20 years. After letting Teresa raise her alone. After not sending a single letter." Matthew's eyes burned. "And now that she's between life and death, you show up." Clara looked down. The shame was evident on her face. "I didn't come to ask for anything. I just found out what happened. They told me she woke up at the wake, that she almost died. She tried to continue, but her voice broke. I found out, and I needed to see her, even if it was just for a minute." Matthew shook his head, trying not to cry. "Lucy spent her whole life asking about you, and one day she stopped because she understood that you weren't going to come." Clara cried silently, just moving her lips. "I was wrong. I know I failed, but she's still my daughter." "No," Matthew replied. "She's Teresa's. She's mine. She's the baby girl in your belly, but she's yours." "I don't know anymore." He looked at the receptionist with eyes filled with tears. "She's not coming up. Not today." Clara didn't argue. She didn't yell. She just lowered her head and took 2 steps back. She looked one last time toward the elevator, as if trying to see someone who couldn't be seen. And then, with slow steps, she walked out the same door she came in, alone, just as she had entered Lucy's life and just as she was leaving it. In the midst of that distressing routine of hospital, intensive care, tests and prayers, Matthew went home alone for one night. He needed to take a hot bath, get some clean clothes, try to sleep for a few hours. But what he wanted most was to feel close to Lucy. Once again, he entered their room without turning on all the lights. He stood in the doorway for a few seconds, just looking. The messy bed, the crooked lamp, the maternity clothes thrown on the chair. Everything still smelled like her. He went to the closet, pulled out the drawer with her nightgowns and underwear. He had to separate some things to take back to the hospital. When he grabbed a pile of folded blouses, something fell out. It was a small notebook covered with flowered fabric with a button sewn on the end like a clasp. A diary was hidden at the bottom of the drawer. Underneath everything, Matthew sat down on the bed slowly. He opened the first page carefully. It was Lucy's handwriting, steady but very curvy. The date was more than 10 years ago. He began to read, and in the first few lines, his heart sank. "My mum left me when I was 4 years old. One day she was home, the next she was gone. No one explained anything to me. They just said she left." He turned the page. Further on, he found another sentence. "Once I heard my grandmother talking to the neighbor. She said that my dad beat her, that he was always drunk, that he threatened everyone, and that my mum left." Matthew stopped. His hand was shaking, but he kept reading. "I remember very little, but I remember the sound of glass breaking, my mum screaming at him. Hiding behind the couch, scared, very scared. I wanted to go with her. I was just a little girl. Why did she leave me?" He closed his eyes, pressing the newspaper against his chest. The pieces began to fall into place. Lucy's silence, her loud jumping, her anger when someone asked about her mom. Lucy, the loud noises, the anger when someone asked about her mother. It all made sense, now she read again. "My grandmother raised me with a lot of love, but I grew up with that emptiness. I said I didn't care, but I dreamed about her. I imagined what my life would have been like if she had taken me with her. Sometimes I think she thinks about me too." Matthew stood there silently, his eyes filled with tears, his heart broken, and he understood. Clara didn't leave because she was a coward. She left to survive. Perhaps out of desperation, perhaps out of fear of seeing her daughter grow up suffering the same thing. Lucy had grown up with pain, yes, with abandonment, but also with a distorted memory of a mother who had no choice. And now maybe it was time to really understand all that. Matthew returned to the hospital the same night he found the diary. He arrived silent, his eyes sunken, his face tired as if he had aged years in a few hours. He slowly made his way up to the intensive care unit and stood there at the door of the room, looking at Lucy lying there. It was the same image he had seen every day. The tubes in her arm, the IV dripping, the machines beeping. But now he knew more. He knew where her silence came from. He knew the name of the fear she had carried in her heart since she was a child. He sat down on the chair next to the bed, took Lucy's hand tenderly, as if asking permission before touching her. "Love," he said softly, "I found your diary." His voice came out. He looked up at the ceiling, tried to take a deep breath, but the lump in his throat wouldn't let him. "I read what you wrote about your mom, about what you went through, and now I don't know what to think." He was silent for a few seconds, as if waiting for her to respond with a movement, a blink, anything. But Lucy was still there between deep sleep and the hope of returning. "When she came to the hospital, I didn't let her in. I told her she didn't have the right, that it was too late." Matthew closed his eyes, trying to hold back the tears that wouldn't stop flowing. "You do. But now, after reading all that, after knowing what you went through, I'm confused, Lucy." "Really? Because maybe you wanted to see her." He caressed her belly affectionately. "Could it be that you dreamed about that?" Although you never said anything, he got up and started walking in circles around the room without looking at anyone, just talking. He was venting to the only person who could understand him, even if it was in silence. "The courage I felt when she appeared. She's still here. I'm not going to lie, but there's also something else, a doubt that won't get out of my head." He stopped and looked at her again. "Who am I to decide for you?" He approached the bed, lowered his face to her ear, and whispered in the softest, most broken voice of the night. "If you wake up, love, that decision will be yours. Not mine, not your grandmother's. Yours." He gave her a long kiss on the forehead and stood there crying silently, standing next to the woman he loved most, hoping that she would wake up someday and tell him what to do. It was early in the morning when Dr. Salazar gently knocked on the glass door of the small room where Matthew was sleeping, slumped in a chair. He woke up with a start, his body numb and his eyes still heavy with tiredness. He got up awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck, trying to figure out if much time had passed. The doctor entered with a clipboard in her hand, her face serious, but her tone calmer than in previous days. "Matthew, I need to talk to you." He sat down in the chair, immediately concerned. "Did something happen to Lucy?" "No, she's still stable, but I finished reviewing her tests, checked her vitals, and now we have a clearer diagnosis." Matthew paid attention, not even blinking. Dr. Salazar sat down slowly in the chair opposite him, paused, looked him in the eyes carefully, and then spoke. "What happened to Lucy is a very rare but real condition. The body goes into a state of deep paralysis, almost not breathing. The heartbeat is very weak. There are no reflexes. It looks like death, but it's not." Matthew stood still with his mouth half open, trying to understand. "So no. Her body went into that state. That's why the doctors at the first hospital thought she had died. But she was alive. Weak. Yes. Almost at the limit, but alive." He ran his hands over his face, a sigh of relief mixed with indignation. "And no one saw that. They should have seen it. It's strange, but there's a protocol for these cases. Lucy had a history of fainting, neurological symptoms. If they had checked more carefully, if they had done an electrocardiogram, more specific tests, they would never have declared her dead." Matthew fell silent, staring at the floor. He was breathing harder, his voice catching in his throat. "So she was buried alive." Dr. Salazar nodded slowly. "Yes, my God. She was lucky and strong, and you had faith. But yes, it was a serious mistake, a mistake that almost cost her life, her and the baby." Matthew got up, walked to the hallway window, and stood there watching the movement of the cars outside. He didn't say anything for a few minutes. Then he returned to the doctor. He sat down again and spoke with tears in his eyes. "Thank you for telling me the truth and for taking care of her." She just nodded with a small smile. "Now it's our responsibility to keep this miracle alive." One step at a time, Matthew looked toward the ICU room where Lucy was sleeping, connected to so many wires and machines. And there, in that moment, he understood the magnitude of what had happened. Lucy had not only come back from death, she had overcome a mistake and was fighting second by second to return to the life that had almost been taken from her. It was supposed to be a secret. It was supposed to be sensitive. But what happened to Lucy was too big to keep quiet. And someone couldn't keep it to themselves. On a cloudy afternoon inside the same hospital, a young nurse who came in for his shift at coffee time saw movement in the ICU. He heard whispers, broken conversations. He saw doctors entering and leaving the room with serious expressions. He asked, insisted, until one of the technicians, without thinking twice, blurted out, "She's the girl from the wake, the pregnant one, the one who woke up." The nurse couldn't believe it. "What do you mean she woke up?" He went to the window in the hallway, took out his cell phone, recorded a shaky video, whispering, "You won't believe what's happening." A woman who had been declared dead woke up in the middle of the wake. "She's here in this hospital. She's alive and the baby is alive too." In less than an hour, the video had thousands of views. In 2 hours, it was in family groups, on gossip sites, and on profiles dedicated to tragedies and miracles. "She's alive and so is the baby." He uploaded it. In less than an hour, the video had thousands of views. In 2 hours, it was in family groups, on gossip sites, on tragedy and miracle profiles. People were sharing it with prayer emojis. Others were laughing. Some were saying it was a lie, a fabrication, an exaggeration. But the video went viral, and the peace inside the hospital was over. The first van with onlookers arrived before 8 p.m. A group of 3 women with cell phones in hand asked at the reception desk, "Where is the woman who came back to life?" Then more journalists arrived with hidden microphones, influencers doing live broadcasts in front of the building, people trying to get in and out. The police were called and the entrance to the ICU was cordoned off. Employees had to wear ID badges even to go to the bathroom. And inside, in the middle of it all, was a family trying to breathe. Teresa found out the news on her own cell phone. A neighbor sent her the link to the video with a message saying, "It's your granddaughter, right?" She couldn't believe it. With difficulty, she pressed the button and saw the image, the hospital hallway, the nurse's voice, her granddaughter's name in the comments, the faces, the montages, the nicknames, the pregnant dead woman, the miracle woman, the new Lazarus. Teresa. Teresa got up slowly, her heart pounding, and called Matthew. He came running. "They're making a circus out of my granddaughter," she said, holding the cell phone with a trembling hand. Matthew grabbed the cell phone. When he saw it, he squeezed her hand tightly. "I'm going to find out who did this." "And what will that change?" she replied, her eyes filled with tears. "It's already out there. They've already made fun of her. They've already talked about her as if she were a toy, as if we weren't people." She took a deep breath, sat down in the chair in the waiting room, and cried softly. She covered her face with her hands. "My granddaughter was almost buried alive, and now she's all over the internet. This isn't fair. It's not fair." Matthew knelt in front of her and held her hands. "I promise we'll protect her, even if the whole world wants to watch. We'll close that door from the inside." But inside he felt it too. Something had changed. That story now belonged to everyone. And that, as cruel as it was, there was no turning back. Matthew woke up early that morning. He had slept in one of the hospital's utility rooms on a makeshift mattress on the floor, covered with a thin sheet and a blanket borrowed from the intensive care team. He was exhausted, but his head wouldn't let him rest. He dreamed about Lucy, about his daughter, about everything that could go wrong. And he always woke up with the same question on his mind. What if she hadn't breathed in time? He went down to the reception desk to get some coffee when the security guard called him over with an envelope in his hand. "They left this for you. They said it was personal." Matthew took the envelope somewhat suspicious. There was no return address, no name, just his first name scribbled on the front in pen. He went up to the intensive care floor, sat down in the hallway, and slowly opened it. It was a letter, plain paper, handwritten, large letters, a little shaky, short, direct, cruel. "Take the videos off the internet. If you're not going to watch them, our hospital didn't do it with bad intentions. But we can do it." Matthew stood still. The blood ran cold. He read it again, the same sentence. Nothing else. No signature. He folded the paper, took a deep breath, but his heart was already pounding in his chest. He felt a knot in his stomach that made it hard to breathe. He went down to the back garden of the hospital. He needed to think. He needed to understand. He sat down on a bench. He stared at the crumpled paper in his hands. It was a cold, cowardly, clear threat. He went back inside and looked for a nurse he trusted. Did anyone see who left this letter? No, they just said it was left at reception. They wouldn't say who they were. Matthew ran his hand over his face. He felt angry, but also afraid. Later that day, a doctor from Salazar's team approached him in a low voice. "Matthew, we received an anonymous report. They say the hospital where Lucy was last treated deleted her records." He looked at her confused. "What do you mean deleted?" "They disappeared from the system. Everything from the day she was admitted to the delivery of the body. It looks like they're covering up a mistake. Someone in there doesn't want this story to get out." Matthew clutched the letter in his pocket. "And they're telling me to keep quiet. You received a threat." He nodded but said nothing more. He knew that he was now facing something bigger than pain. It was fear. It was powerful people trying to hide what they did. But he also knew something. If he kept quiet, maybe other Lucys wouldn't have the same chance. And at that moment, looking out the window of the intensive care unit, he thought only one thing. If someone wants to hide the truth, it's because the truth hurts them more than it hurt us. Clara arrived early at the hospital that day. She didn't go to try to see Lucy. No, this time she knew the door was still closed to her, and she respected that. But she came with something else in her heart. The truth. She carried an old folder full of yellowed papers, old clippings, copies of documents, letters, everything she had kept in silence for years. She went to the administration office and asked for a space, a small room, any corner. She needed to record something, a video, not for the internet, not to get likes, but so that someday if Lucy wanted to hear it, she could know. The hospital gave her a small room with no windows, dim lighting, a scratched wooden table, and an old cell phone propped up on a cardboard box that became a camera. And there, alone, Clara pressed the record button and took a deep breath, her eyes already red before saying the first word. "My name is Clara Ramirez. I am Lucy's mother." She paused, swallowing her tears. "When she was 4 years old, I left. Not because I was a coward, not because I didn't love my daughter. I left because her father threatened me, he beat me, locked me in the house with her crying on the other side of the door. He told me that if I tried to escape with Lucy, he would kill us both." She closed her eyes, trying to control the trembling in her mouth. "I left in the early morning with nothing. I left with the clothes on my back, leaving my daughter asleep in her room and telling Teresa to pick her up, because I thought that maybe then he wouldn't hurt her, that by saving her life, I was saving a part of myself." Clara took an envelope out of the folder and showed it to the camera. "These are copies of the police reports. No one wanted to protect me at that time, not the police or anyone else. And when I tried to get custody of my daughter back 2 years later, the judge said it was better for her to stay with her grandmother. They said I was unstable, that I had run away, that I was irresponsible, and they didn't want to hear my version, just more tears. But this time she didn't back down. I wrote letters, many, hundreds, but none were delivered, and I don't even know if they were kept. I never stopped loving my daughter, never. And now after everything, I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness because maybe I don't deserve it. I just came to say I tried. I fought, even though I was far away, even though I was in the dark." She took a deep breath. She leaned forward a little. "If one day, Lucy, you want to know the truth, here it is. And if you don't want to, that's okay. I understand. But I still love you. I've always loved you." Clara pressed the stop button. Silence. She put the papers away carefully. She folded each letter lovingly as if closing a piece of herself. She left the room slowly without haste, with the dignity of someone who does not ask for justice, only listens, only waits. And there remained in her heart the hope that one day she would no longer have to hide behind the past. The early morning was cold and silent in the hospital. Outside, everything was asleep. But inside the intensive care unit, every second was a vigil. The clock read 317. Only the beeping of the monitors broke the silence. Matthew was not sleeping. Sitting next to Lucy's bed, his eyes tired, he held her hand with the same delicacy as always, as if he could warm her with the strength of his love. He spoke softly, as if his voice could reach that deep sleep where she was still trapped. "Love, if you're in there, come back to me, please. Everything is waiting for you. Our home, our daughter, me too." At that moment there was a small movement. So slight that Matthew thought it was just his imagination, but it wasn't. Her finger moved, then her eyelashes. Slowly her eyes began to open, half cloudy. Slowly, like someone waking from a dream that lasted too long. "Lucy," he whispered, his heart beating fast. She blinked. Her lost eyes tried to focus, her lips trembled, and with a small but meaningful effort, she tried to smile. She didn't quite succeed, but the corners of her mouth turned up just a little, and that little bit said everything. Matthew brought his hand to his face to hold back the tears. His voice broke. "You came back, my God. You're back." But it didn't last long. Lucy's eyes closed again. Her body relaxed and silence returned to the room. Matthew, desperate, called the nurse. The team rushed in. The machines beeped. But this time it was different. It wasn't a drop. It was stability. The heartbeat is stronger. Blood pressure stable. "Breathing light but steady," said the doctor on duty. "She's coming back." Matthew stood still, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. The hope that until then had been only faith was now a pulse. It was real. That same morning, with the day just beginning, Dr. Salazar came in with a new test in her hand. She had done another ultrasound. "Matthew, can you come with me?" They entered a small examination room. The image was on the screen, and there in that blue light he saw the little heart beating strongly with rhythm. The little girl was moving, kicking, stretching her arms. Dr. Salazar smiled. "She's healthy. Perfect. It's a girl." Matthew put his hand to his mouth, his eyes shining. A little girl stared at the screen and said in a broken voice, "Her name is going to be Hope." The doctor was also moved, nodded her head, and there in that room it wasn't just the baby who was alive. It was the certainty that everything had been worth it. Matthew was determined. After seeing Lucy open her eyes, after knowing that the baby was okay, he understood that it wasn't enough to just say thank you because everything was turning out okay. He had to do something for everything that almost went wrong. He looked for a lawyer in town, brought documents, reports from the new hospital, records of previous care. He wanted justice. He wanted the hospital where Lucy was declared dead to answer so that no one else would have to go through what they had gone through. But the first response he received was curt. "We can't find anything in the system." Matthew frowned. "What do you mean, nothing?" "No admission records, no certificate, no body release form, nothing." As if she had never been there. There, Matthew felt the ground disappear beneath him, his head spinning. He knew this wasn't a mistake. It had been deleted. Someone had cleaned up the files, made the evidence disappear. They were covering up the mistake. "They're trying to hide it," he said, his voice trembling as if nothing had happened. He returned to the hospital where Lucy was now recovering. He spoke to Dr. Salazar. She confirmed it sadly. "We asked for the files. They said they were lost in the system, but that doesn't happen by accident. They're protecting someone in there." Matthew was filled with rage, but another feeling soon followed. Fear. He knew that getting involved in this was dangerous. He had already been threatened before, but now, with Lucy alive and his unborn daughter, he couldn't back down. That's when the press arrived. First a local journalist, then a reporter from a larger channel, until an investigative journalist known for exposing difficult cases arrived at the hospital with a small team and a firm voice. I saw the video, read about what happened, and started pulling on the thread. Matthew greeted him with suspicion, but it was enough for the man to show him a folder full of names and documents to realize he wasn't there for fame. It wasn't just Lucy, the journalist said. I found 2 other similar cases in the same hospital. Deaths declared in a hurry, bodies released without examination. One of them was a child. Matthew was in shock. And why didn't anyone say anything? Because no one had survived to tell the tale. Now Lucy's case began to appear in the newspapers, first as a miracle, then as an accusation. The story touched the country. Human rights groups took action. The justice system was pressured. Matthew, who until yesterday was just a distraught husband, became the voice of many. And Lucy, although silent, became a symbol of resistance, of an error that is not accepted, of a life that does not fade away, hope that would not be silenced. It was morning when the sun shone softly through the window of the U.S. There was no hurry in that light, no noise, no confusion, only silence and hope. Lucy opened her eyes wider. This time it was not a startle. It was not a reflex. It was presence. She was there, awake, whole, though still weak. Her face was calm, her breathing soft, her fingers moving slowly over the sheet. Matthew, who was dozing with his head resting on the edge of the bed, woke up to the simplest sound in the world, the whisper of her voice. Matthew, he jumped up with a start. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Lucy leaned over and touched his face carefully. "Honey, you're back," she smiled. A real smile, small but full of life. "I'm here," she said in a low, hoarse voice. He cried like a child, with relief, with wonder, with everything. "Everything is okay now. You're alive. Our daughter is fine. Everything is fine, love." She tried to speak but stopped. Her eyes were different. They had a new calmness, but also a hidden weight, something she knew she would have to face. Matthew sat down beside her, took her hand and spoke tenderly. "There's something I need to ask you, but only if you want to." She nodded gently. He took a deep breath. "Your mum came to the hospital. She said she wants to see you." Lucy's gaze drifted to the ceiling for a few seconds. Not a tear, not a word, just that silence that says more than anything else. Then she closed her eyes for a moment, as if she needed to search within herself for an answer that still hurt. And then, in a trembling but firm voice, she said, "I want to. I want to." She opened her eyes. Now they were filled with tears. But not now. Matthew squeezed her hand tightly, respected her time and space, and said nothing more. Lucy looked at him, and even though she was crying, there was peace on her face. "I just need to understand." Before losing herself, she turned her face slowly and looked out the window. The sky outside was clear, light blue, cloudless, a sky that seemed as new as she was. And in that moment, everything no longer felt so heavy because she had returned. And although without haste, she was ready to continue in her own way, in her own time, with an open heart to listen, and perhaps one day embrace. 2 weeks later, in that same ICU, where death was defeated by love, by science and by a miracle, Lucy felt the first strong contraction. It was early in the morning. The team on duty rushed in. Matthew, who was sleeping next to the bed, woke up frightened. She clutched the sheets, her face tense with pain, but her gaze firm. The baby's heartbeat was normal, but Lucy's condition remained high risk. She was weak, her body still recovering. The doctors spoke quickly among themselves. It was time. They couldn't wait any longer. They hurriedly prepared the delivery room. Lights on, hands putting on gloves, voices whispering with urgency and faith. Matthew went in with her. They gave him a gown, a cap and a mask. But his eyes, oh, those eyes were bare, shining like never before. He held Lucy's hand tightly, not like someone demanding courage, but like someone offering it. She looked at him with sweat running down her forehead, tears mingled with pain. "I'm scared," she whispered between moans. Matthew squeezed her hand, bent down, touched her forehead with his, and said, "You already died once. Now it's time to be born again." Lucy closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and with all the pain, all the strength, all the love she still had inside her, she pushed once, twice, 3 times. Time seemed to stand still, as if the world were waiting with her for that cry that would not come. And then the cry came loud, high, alive. The sound broke the room like thunder in the silence. The doctors smiled. The nurses cried. Matthew fell to his knees with his hands covering his face. Lucy, exhausted, stretched her neck as if wanting to see a little piece of herself being born before her eyes. Dr. Salazar took the baby girl in her eye, wiped her delicate face, wrapped her in a white blanket, and announced in a broken voice, "This baby girl is living proof that life wins." Matthew got up, went to the doctor, took his daughter in his trembling arms, and pressed his forehead against hers. "Hope, you're here." He returned to Lucy, who could barely speak, but was crying silently. He placed the baby on her chest. The two touched for the first time, and there, in that moment, no words were necessary. Lucy caressed her daughter's face with tears in her eyes and whispered, "We won, my love. We won." And in that hospital room, so marked by pain and near loss, hope was born. Not just a baby girl, but the certainty that when life wants to live, there is no stopping it. The rain fell softly outside, slowly wetting the windows of the room. Lucy was sitting in the armchair, with Hope asleep in her arms. The light from the lamp made everything look warm, intimate, almost sacred. Matthew slept on the sofa, tired, with an open book on his chest. Lucy looked at her daughter as if she wanted to commit every detail of that little face to memory. The thin eyelashes, the pink mouth, the soft sigh that escaped her lips. There was such peace in that scene that for a moment she forgot the world outside, but something inside her still hurt. On top of the dresser was a folded piece of paper with writing on it. She had spent the entire afternoon writing it, sentence by sentence, thinking, erasing, writing again. It was a letter to her mother. She picked up the paper carefully. It wasn't meant to be given to anyone, just a way to get her feelings out. But before putting it away, she wanted Hope to hear it. With her voice quiet and broken with emotion, she began to read. "Mom, I spent my life trying to understand your absence. I made up 1,000 stories to explain your disappearance. Some made me angry, others made me feel sorry for you, but none of them gave me peace." She paused. The baby stirred in her lap. She smiled and continued, "These days in the hospital between life and death, I thought about you a lot. I thought about everything we didn't get to experience. The birthdays you missed, the times I cried and wished for your hug." Lucy's eyes were already filled with tears. "But I also thought about myself, about who I became despite your absence, about who I am now, carrying this little girl in my arms." She looked at her daughter, stroked her soft hair, and continued in an even calmer voice, "Hope you will know who your grandmother was. When the time comes, when I feel that you understand the pain we carry, but before that, you will know what it is to be loved." She folded the letter, dried her eyes, and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Because you will not grow up with silence. You will grow up with love." And she put the paper in the drawer with no recipient, no address, but with everything she needed to say. Time passed, but the wound was still there. It didn't hurt like it used to, but it had left a mark. Lucy was now at home taking care of Hope. With a calmer look on her face, like someone who knows how precious every day is, every breath, Matthew did everything with her. Changing diapers, bathing the baby, staying up late at night, but always with a tired and happy smile. Then one afternoon, like any other, the news came. Matthew was in the kitchen when the phone rang. He listened carefully without saying much. He thanked the caller, hung up, and went to Lucy, who was breastfeeding Hope on the patio, her hair pulled back as if she were outside and her feet bare. "It's official," he said, standing in front of her. "The hospital was condemned. The doctor lost his license. He's going to have to answer for negligence." Lucy didn't say anything at first. She continued to look at her daughter, who was drinking milk with the peacefulness of someone who doesn't know the weight of the world. After a while, she spoke almost in a whisper. "It was only fair, wasn't it?" Matthew bent down and touched her hand. "Yes, but if you want, we can go further. Ask for compensation. Talk to the press again." She shook her head calmly without rushing. "No." Matthew remained silent, respecting her time. Lucy then looked at him, her eyes full of determination, but without anger. "I don't want revenge. I just want to live. I've already lost too much time." She looked up at the sky and took a deep breath. "I want to take care of my daughter, my husband, my life. I want to be able to wake up without fear, sleep in peace, eat fruit under the morning sun, and laugh at silly things. That's justice to me." Matthew nodded, moved. He knew that what she was saying came from a place few people know, the place of someone who had been on the other side and come back. And she didn't come back for revenge. She came back to appreciate life. There on that simple terrace, with the smell of coffee in the air and the soft sound of the baby breathing, Lucy proved that the greatest justice is to move forward without letting pain harden your heart. The bell tower of the little church of Santa sounded different that Sunday. It was the same sound as always, but with a feeling that no one could explain. People from all over the village began to arrive early, silently, respectfully. Elderly women with their rosaries in their hands, neighbors with flowers they had cut from their own gardens, and even the curious. This time they came out of gratitude, not to gossip. The Mass was not announced with fanfare. There were no posters or invitations, but everyone knew it was the Mass for Lucy's second life. Inside MG, the pews gradually filled up. The church was simple with whitewashed walls, the altar decorated with fresh flowers, and candles flickering in the wind coming in through the open windows. The priest adjusted his vestments with trembling hands. He had never celebrated anything so symbolic, and then the doors opened. Lucy entered. She was wearing a light flowing dress, her hair loose, her eyes calm, holding Hope, dressed in white, in her arms. She slept unaware of the importance of the moment. Matthew stood beside her, steady, emotional. With his hand on the backs of both of them, the people stood up silently, one by one, and began to applaud, first timidly, then louder. It was not a shout, it was respect. It was as if each applause said, "You did it, you came back, you are alive." Lucy paused for a second at the door, her eyes filled with tears, her heart racing. Then she walked to the altar with Hope in her arms and her soul at peace. There at the back of the church, leaning against the last white column, she saw everything. She didn't come closer. She didn't do anything. She just stood there, her eyes filled with tears, her hands crossed over her chest. She didn't want to be seen. She just wanted to see. When Lucy's eyes from the altar met hers, there were no words, no gestures, just a long look. A look that said, "I saw you. I know you're here." Clara lowered her head and smiled through her tears. The priest, his voice already broken, began the Mass today. "We are not here for a death. We are here for a life. For the life that overcame error, that overcame fear, that even overcame death. And in that small church where faith lives in the details, a new story was born full of forgiveness, new beginnings, and beautiful silences. Because sometimes living is already the greatest miracle we can celebrate, and a mother and daughter were about to be reunited to make up for lost time. And if it were your daughter in that coffin, and if it were you standing there with your hand trembling, not knowing if it was true or just hope, would you have the courage to open it, to love after so much pain? This story isn't just about Lucy. It's about each and every one of us, about the time we waste, about the forgiveness that takes so long. about the love that persists even when everything seems lost. Now tell me, if this happened to you, what would you do instead of Matthew and in Lucy's place? Would you give up? Would you have the strength to go on? Comment below. Share this story with someone who needs to believe that miracles still happen. And don't forget to activate the bell, because in the next videos, there are more real stories that will touch your heart. Before you leave, click now on the video that is appearing on the screen. It's a moving story that has already made many people cry and think about their own lives.